Oh, welcome back to Normalizing Men's Mental Health. I have the opportunity of interviewing Nelson Whitting, who's the founder of No Limits Hypnotherapy, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and the author of Your Problem Isn't Pornography. He helps Christian men, husbands, parents, and families break ugly cycles of shame and unwanted habits through subconscious reprogramming, impulse control, self-discipline, and faith-based behavior change. How you doing, Nelson?
Good. Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So, what got you into the field of being a clinical hypnotherapist?
Oh, good question. So I was I've been intrigued with power of the mind for a long time. In high school, I was wanting to find a faster way to be smarter in my classes without cheating. I came across a book called Double Your Brain Power, and it taught me a breathing technique to get me in an alpha optimum learning state. And I started employing it as a senior in high school on all of my tests and was acing them all without hardly any study. That was kind of cool. Basically, put myself in that state, learn the content, put myself back in that state to regurgitate it. And that was kind of my first wow, like we can tap into these powers of the mind and I can do a lot less work and get a lot more out of it. So that was kind of fun. And then in my book, I kind of tell the story of the first time I was hypnotized on stage at our senior all nighter party. Hypnotist came, the local guy here, and I was on the very end of a group of about 40 people in the line, and he started taking us down into this trance state and relaxing me and relaxing and relaxing and relaxing all of us. And I was on the very end and I fell out of the chair and I smacked my head super hard on the stage. And it just reverberated. Everyone in the audience was just like, and I heard them all and I felt no pain. And I was like, oh, that's really weird. I felt nothing there and I'm totally relaxed. This is such a strange sensation. And then he proceeded to do this little hypnosis show that I was totally checked out from. I didn't even like feel like participating. I was just enjoying this interesting, euphoric, relaxing state. And so that was kind of the beginning of my introduction into hypnosis. But then I went into a bunch of different career paths, and about 7 years ago, I ended up going back to school for clinical hypnotherapy because I wasn't as fulfilled in my other jobs, and I wanted to help people, and I wanted to help them in the fastest way possible. And hypnotherapy kept coming up in my research as the fastest modality if I could help people overcome the stigma, misunderstanding, uh, some people think it's devil worship. People think it's mind control or brainwashing or some weird thing. But we're far enough along now in the neuroscience of it that we know what's actually happening. Um, and it jives very well with Christian beliefs, which is my background. My upbringing was Christian, still is, and because it works so well, that's what I decided to jump into. So
So, how does it actually work? And when I was asking you before, I was asking how does it help you reprogram your brain, or how does it help you with your urges?
yeah, yeah, that's a really smart question, and it's actually not necessarily a short answer, uh, unless you want the short answer. Basically, it's just a state of super learning and conditioning, putting people in something like a flow state is what it is. So when they're in a flow state, they just think faster. You slow down the number of thoughts and you increase processing speed on those thoughts inside the brain. You're going to think faster. You're going to have more clarity. You can make more decisions that are going to affect the whole brain. That's kind of the short answer. Do you want the long answer? Kind of the neuroscience of how it actually works.
Yes, please.
So there are several ways to think about it, and it depends on what your come from is. There's the neuroscience of it. There's a lot of good quantum physics that explains what's happening inside the psyche. Uh, One of the easiest ways to understand it is that you're never going to learn anything new unless your brain is in a neuroplastic state. That's what neuroplasticity is. It means that you're learning something new. You're making new connections, right? And you're never going to learn something new, one, unless you're challenged, and two, unless you're open to it. like up until then, your brain is going to be firing survival mechanisms that keep your current scripts and stories in place, right? That amygdala and limbic system, it's always going to tell you, hey, our survival, our ego is here. This is how we operate. And it's only doing what you've ever told it to do. But it's going to stay in that state until you can quiet down the amygdala and tell the limbic system that it's safe enough to start communicating with prefrontal cortex, other areas of the brain, so that it's not just so compartmentalized. Because the brain kind of tends to operate in a conscious state of mind. It tends to operate like there's all these different neighborhoods or subdivisions inside your brain, and they don't want to talk to each other. And so finding the ways, the modalities, there's a whole bunch of different modalities that can help kick you into this state of hemispheric synchronization, where the two brains are talking to each other, left, right, front, back, in that state where you finally can tell the brain, hey, it's safe, we can think new things. You introduce what they call a prediction error. You have this kind of way of thinking, it's kind of a rut inside your brain. These synapses are firing together, wiring together certain ways, stories, things that you're telling yourself over and over. But you introduce a prediction error into that way of thinking when you get it to start communicating with the whole brain, and you say, well, what about this? What about this idea? What about this idea? And you can do it. I mean, in talk therapy, it can take you 30, 40, 50, 200 sessions, and you might not have that breakthrough. But in hypnotherapy, you can do it in 1 or 2 or 3, because you're getting the brain in that state of receptivity. And in that state, sometimes weird things happen. And this is why people think that it's maybe crude or unsophisticated or outdated or scary or dangerous or something like that. Because if you've ever seen anyone, in a meditation state having these so-called Kundalini experiences, or a breath work state, and they're having a major emotional release. In hypnotherapy, this kind of thing happens all the time. They have these physical ab reactions where either the catharsis, or you're just hitting that nerve emotionally. Things start happening. People can start shaking. They can start convulsing. They can go into these huge emotional releases within just a few minutes of the very first session of coming in. Because rapport with your therapist is something that in talk therapy they kind of focus really a lot on. But we find what's most important is that the person wants to change, and if they're willing to submit to a process of change, then there are really fast ways to get them there. And hypnotherapy tends to come to the top in my mind, because it's a very mechanical, repeatable way of dealing with everyone's issues that doesn't require leading them in any certain way or having a certain kind of a belief system. Just asking certain questions after you've induced them into that trance state that allow them to come up against their contradictions. Because people only ever have a problem because at one time it was a solution for them, if that makes sense.
It does, because if we just talk about pornography can allow somebody to feel seen or heard, and it's really a toxic mimic of what they're actually trying to get a release out of. So it does make sense when you say that, but then you said to relax the limbic part of your brain, pretty much laying down your fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. So it's interesting when you're talking about that. So how does it actually help a person not want to go back to the old behaviors, the old patterns?
Well, if you think about it like this, there's the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. We talk about those, and people don't usually have a very good understanding of how those work just mechanically in the brain, and they think they have to have a lot of neuroscience. There is good neuroscience behind it. Logic and analysis is how we tend to think mostly in the Western world, and it's the conscious mind that does that. The prefrontal cortex tends to be that executive decision maker that wants to see everything set up in a linear, concrete, sequential manner, right? But the limbic system does not think that way. The subconscious mind that is associated with those functions, those are the functions of imagination, memory, emotion. Those are the more intuitional type states, right? So when we're talking about changing someone's urges or cravings, a lot of people that focus on behavioral changes, stuff like talk therapy with CBT or DBT or something like that, they're wanting to get into that deeper state of thought. You're cognitively thinking deeper about the problem, but they're still focused on behavioral changes, which means they're really only talking to the conscious side of the mind almost exclusively, and giving a lot of lip service to the subconscious, like, oh, this is where we want to get, and this is where we are going to pretend that we're at, but they're not actually there. They don't know how to bring that side of the mind online. And when the subconscious mind and the conscious mind are in conflict, the subconscious mind is always going to win. Okay, so at some point, like to your point, if somebody wants to be seen, and let's say they develop a, they develop a loneliness after going and looking at pornography. Now they want to be seen, and they don't want to feel rejected, so they're going and finding all of these images on a screen or something like that. Consciously, they know that's not the right thing to do. I mean, it's why they're doing it in secret. They know they shouldn't be doing that. If they're a Christian, for example, like in our background, it's a commandment. You don't lust after a woman in your heart, or you're committing adultery with her, kind of a thing. It's not how you develop and foster good relationships, right? So we don't want to create objectification. Consciously, they might know that. But if at one point they told their subconscious, no, there's a really good reason why we want to keep this around, then they're like James says in the Bible, they're the double-minded man who's unstable in all of his ways. Conscious mind is in conflict with the subconscious mind. So when you ask, how do you get someone to not have the urges? Well, an urge is a motivation problem. An urge is, when I say motivation, motive or to emote, these are words that are the root words for emotion, right? Emotions are what move you. They're the motive for action. So you have action, then you have the feelings or the emotions underneath the action. But what is creating that emotional state? What is creating the urge and the craving to begin with? Well, it's what's underneath that, right? It's the thoughts. And what's underneath those thoughts, or what constitutes those thoughts, are your belief systems, your worldview, your understanding of how the world works. And you might say, together with the belief system, or even underneath the belief system, now you have identities. And I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes, and I really like how people are getting to the root cause of the problem faster when they go after what is the identity. And they're not focused so much on what is the behavior, the craving, the urge, the reaction, the addiction, because this is all kind of an imagination problem, really. What is the person letting fuel their imagination? It's going to be a belief system along the lines of identifying with, I'm weak, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, shameful and guilty type identities. Or if it's lust, them feeling like, well, this is just normal, or I'm just going to live with this, or I'm not strong enough to fix it, I can't fix it, I'm too weak to fix it. Or if I tell my wife or tell my church leader I've confessed, I've gotten it off my chest, and now that's all I need to do, and then they go back to it. And so urges and cravings, behaviors, are not what we call the problem. We don't directly deal with those, for the same reason that I wrote the title of that book, which is Your Problem Isn't Pornography. Because pornography isn't the problem, just like overeating isn't a problem, the craving, the urges isn't the problem. Those are all symptoms of an underlying way of thinking. So when you change how you're thinking and change your identity association with that thing, then it becomes uninteresting to you. And then the cravings and the urges just go away.
So I'm not actually like very linguistic with the clinical terms for hypnotherapists, but when a person goes under, how are they able to expose that negative thoughts? How are they able to share that? How are they able to really connect that out loud so that they're able to make a conscious effort to change it?
Yeah, so it seems like there's maybe a couple questions there. So when somebody is hypnotized, Hollywood and maybe some weird conspiracy theories will tell you that you're losing consciousness, or you're losing control. You're letting go of control. And in a sense, there's accuracy to say that you're letting go, but you're letting go to gain more control over an inner portion of your mind. Because when you go into a trance state, A trance state is neuroscientifically just constituted by a lower brainwave state, right? You're moving out of beta down into that alpha theta brainwave state, and so you're having less thoughts. So let's say I induce you into trance right now, but just by having you close your eyes, I tell you to go internal, do some breathing, stimulate that vagus nerve, and I start asking you specific questions that force you to search your mind, right? Search your mind as to, for example, you look at pornography. What's the emotion that comes up when you're looking at pornography? And then they'll say, oh, it's a lust. And I say, well, when did that all start for you? And then they'll start searching their mind, going back in their memory. And you've already grabbed an emotion. That's a limbic system function. You've already grabbed a memory now. They're going back to maybe the first time they started to feel that. And then asking, well, what were you thinking at the time? What was going on in your mind when you were having this experience? Well, now you're starting to unveil or reveal the belief systems that they're starting to explain to you while they're in that state. And in a state of hypnosis, at least the way we do it, we don't want someone to be so checked out that they're sleeping. So we still have a full conversation with them back and forth. And they're totally aware enough to do that. And they'll remember as much in that conversation as they would in any other normal conversation. So they're actually giving us all the information, and we're not asking leading questions or telling them, hey, is this the problem? Is that the problem? We want to find out what their subconscious is telling us. And that's a very interesting thing to do, because a lot of people will say, oh, it's a shame problem, or it's a guilt problem, or maybe it's or a lust problem. And those would all make a lot of sense for a pornography problem, right? But that's not actually what we find when we dig and find out what is the subconscious mind doing. Because somebody may have just felt rejected by somebody. Oh, lost my. Can you see me?
No.
There you go. I'll give you an example of this. Somebody who has a pornography problem now, and you're asking them, oh, well, here's one. A guy who, this was an LDS bishop that came in and saw me, and he had a porn and masturbation problem, wanted to get rid of it. We induced him into trance. We started digging and looking for where this all started for him. So we do these age regression techniques, and he's in college, so didn't have to go back to childhood, which a lot of people assume you have to go back to childhood, but just went back to college, and he's sitting there in his dorm room, and he's all alone, and he's feeling sadness because he's alone. That's it. So his sadness and his loneliness led him to want to look at pornography. The whole session, he didn't talk about shame. He didn't talk about guilt. He didn't talk about lust. It was just this intense, overwhelming sadness that he wanted to feel better about. And we know from addiction theory that all these obsessive compulsive behaviors are wanting to escape something, wanting to feel better about something.
So how do people handle when they now disrupt it and they went back in the past, like now all these behaviors that they have created over time? For instance, an individual gets into a car, turns on the radio because he wants to listen to music and just drive. And he has a certain automation. This is just very layman's terms. And disrupting it. So, for instance, there's a person that will go into the shower. As soon as they go into the shower, they think, hey, I'm going to go watch some pornography. I'm going to go masturbate.
Sure.
When now, after they actually first looked at while they started masturbating, how do they change that pattern? Or does that pattern just completely erode and they just go into the shower and just bathe like they're supposed to?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. And that's why people think it's like almost like a magical experience to have this kind of transformation, because what you're talking about is triggers. So a lot of people will go into these therapists and they'll say, well, what are your triggers? Well, my triggers are, well, I'm on the internet, or I'm sitting on the toilet, or I'm in the shower, or I'm at the swimming pool and there's the sexy bikini, or there's the hot jogger that runs down the street, right? And there's all these triggers, so to speak. Well, the triggers are triggering an emotional state that's triggering a belief system about that thing. So you can say in a behavioral kind of a traditional behavioral theoretical way of approaching that, you'd say, well, if it's on the computer and that's your trigger, then you need to put up site blockers. Or if it's on your phone, you need to get a dumb phone, put a blocker on your phone. Or you need to put a rubber band on your wrist and flip it when you get tempted, or you need to take a walk or splash cold water on your face, go to the gym, do some push-ups. These are all distraction tools. They're coping techniques, and they can kind of help you manage the problem sometimes if you find the right kinds that work for you, but they won't fix the real problem, because you have to change the emotional state by changing the belief system underneath. So if you're having an overreactivity that kind of, in fact, they say this is what happens with pornography, is you look at so much of it, it starts to mimic, ADHD symptoms of hyperreactivity. You're creating hyperarousal responses that are totally unnecessary. They go way beyond what the biological, physiological desire is, for sex. Now you're like trying to get as much of it as you possibly can in excess of what the body actually needs. And that's a mental problem. It's not an increased testosterone problem, because the testosterone is only going to match what your mind is telling it to do. So if your mind is stuck on this imagination loop, and then you get into hypnosis and you say, here's the loop, here's what you've been thinking. When you get into the shower, you feel like you got to masturbate. When you get on the computer, you feel like you got to look at pornography, and you're in this loop. Once you get into a trance state, you can basically just insert a new idea that they come up with, and they insert that into that loop. It's like if there's a river here and it's dirty, and they insert a chlorine capsule into the dirty, lazy river. Well, now it starts to clean up the whole thing. And it just kind of goes around and around until that new insight informs the entire system. We don't need to think that way anymore. And that's what's cool, because now these people don't have hyperarousal responses to being in what formerly were those big triggering states for them.
Does this also help out people with traumatic brain injuries, the ones that have a disruption with the way that it fires back and forth between the left and right, depending on how severe the TBI is?
I just a disclaimer here. Obviously, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a licensed psychologist. We don't diagnose or cure or prescribe or treat anything, and we have to say that just to be safe with everyone, because our expertise lies in operating more with people who have a fully functioning brain, we should say. Like my daughter right now, she has cerebral palsy. She's missing half of her left brain. Like I can't do hypnosis on her. She won't respond the same way another child will respond. And so people with a traumatic brain injury, a lot of times they are seeing actual dysfunction in the brain due to brain damage. And in those cases, there's not always clarity of thought for those people to be complying and following along with instructions the way they need to when they're, in kind of more of a hypnotherapy induction type situation. In those cases, though, for sure, I still believe there's healing, because you can have neurogenesis. There's all kinds of technologies that can help with TBIs that I've heard of. My daughter's gotten stem cells several times. Regenerative signaling factors up in, into her nasal passages, right up into the brain, things that will stimulate neurogenesis through mesenchymal stem cells and exosomes and stuff like that. Infrared therapies that can be really good for that. But I'm not an expert on any of that. So we actually have a success criteria for people to come in. If they want to hit that 95% recovery rate in those 1 to 3 or maybe 4 or 5, 6 sessions max with us, they have to meet a criteria, which is that they don't have a diagnosed mental illness. They're not on mind-altering medications that are hacking them more so into more anxiety, more depression, more suicidal ideation, more aggressive behaviors, more addictive behaviors. They can't be on that stuff, or we just can't have the clarity that we need to move forward. So in those cases, there's mental hospitals and there's other therapies and retreats and things that people can do. But if somebody's clear-minded enough and they meet that criteria, we have a very high recovery rate.
It makes sense. It's I was just curious because I know so a lot of the people that will be listening to this, they know people with TBIs, and they would be
Mm.
curious about the emotional outburst and how it creates that type of disruption where it alters to aggression to be able to have some type of control. With your background about being a Christian, how does the Christianity belief also play into you being a hypnotherapist? I know you spoke about the Bible just briefly. Do you believe that also having a strong spiritual relationship helps out with healing?
Yeah. Um, One answer to that is for sure, yes, is the answer. But I think that a lot of people think that they're spiritual when they're emotionally totally broken and not really connected, not living life with joy. And the whole purpose of Christ's gospel, in my opinion, was to have joy. Men are that they might have joy. And he says, rejoice, for I have overcome the world. Right? We're not supposed to be wallowing in these low levels of just thoughts and feelings and ideas that are disturbing our peace, right? And so um, on one hand, for sure, the Christ's gospel, I think, helps a lot for people um, who need an identity. They need a community of people who believe the same. They have a body of believers. Um, the It jives really well with hypnotherapy because prayer and meditation create a lot of the same phenomena as hypnotherapy. Going into deep states of prayer will create the sense of connection. On From a quantum physics standpoint, the deeper you go into subatomic levels, you don't get more and more separated. They're trying to separate all these things into different particles. The deeper they go, but what they find is the deeper they go, the more integrated and the more connected and the more aligned everything is. That's what string theory is all about, right? And so instead of getting more and more personal, you get more and more social because you see how everything is connected. There is nothing that's separated. And it goes into that idea of maybe quantum entanglement, which I think the Christian gospel helps a lot with, to say, hey, we're all the same family here. We have a purpose here. We came from somewhere. We're going somewhere. And together we're helping each other develop a strong moral system of peace and nonviolence and love. I mean, it all comes down, in my opinion, to what Paul was saying to the Romans or to the Corinthians in the Bible of having charity. Uh, because this is not something that you just have towards someone else, an unconditional or an everlasting love towards someone else. It's something that you have to develop for yourself so that you can overcome the problem. And if you don't do that with yourself, you're never going to have enough energy internally to give it to anybody else. And so I think that the Christian religion does a very good job of helping instill that inside people if they don't get stuck in like guilt complexes that are the bane of organized religion in a lot of ways.
This might sound like a simple question, but what about when a person wants to break these patterns, but they haven't been role modeled it before? And would hypnotherapy be able to help a person be able to change those patterns if they fully don't understand how those patterns can look like in a healthy manner?
Well, yeah, I think that that's why, honestly, on a kind of a zoomed out level, I think that's why everyone has their problem, is just because they just don't know. They haven't seen it yet. I mean, the first rule of change is that you have to become aware that there's a solution, aware of what that solution is, right? And once it's role modeled to you, like you're saying, or somebody can teach it to you, well, then you're off to the races, because then at least you can test and experiment with your faith and move forward in any of those directions. I think that you mentioned this in one of your other episodes, that vulnerability is extremely necessary to have any kind of healing, because the vulnerability puts you in that childlike state of mind where you're open. You have what the scriptures call a broken heart and a contrite spirit. You're in a humbled state where you know that you need help and that you need to open up and you need to be willing to change. And the only way that you're going to change is if you're challenged. So the person who hasn't had it role modeled, I mean, the moment they learn something new, they're creating new connections inside the mind. I mean, within milliseconds, old synapses are being pruned, new connections are being made. So the more you can teach someone, I mean, in the religion I grew up with, we were taught that knowledge is what saves you. The more knowledge you have, the better your decisions can be, the more you can exercise free agency. And that's how you end up putting all your spiritual enemies under your feet, putting Satan under your feet, putting bad habits under your feet, putting the natural man that you've been habituated into under your feet till you rise above all of that. But you do that through gaining knowledge. And I think faith is can only be exercised when you're vulnerable, and it can only happen when you're making new decisions that are more in line with what you know that is right and true and correct for you. I think faith is just the decision-making process, saying, I am willing to take action. And maybe that action is just a decision mentally to decide I'm going to do this. And mentally you say, I'm going to commit to it. I think that's a faithful response. And then the more action you pile up on top of that, now you have a lot of momentum.
So I agree with you. With vulnerability is the way to be able to change. If you try to pour water into a closed jar, nothing would go. Vulnerable would be more open. You, it's a way to be able to receive. And when I look at faith, I struggle with my own faith, with Christianity. I've actually been to two different LDS churches over here in Billings, Montana. I've been to the Dharma Center. I've been to several other Christian different denominations. And one of the things I've learned is that the Bible and God, the way that is actually written and the way I understand it, it's about actually love and grace, healing and change. And it's also about being able to grow from our discomforts and being tested over and over again with different parables or different problems. And when I look at it from this perspective, individuals, like for instance, what I've actually heard about with the Mormons, they would go out into different areas onto their missions, and they would go out there to bring non-believers in. They're extremely versed with the Bible. They know the Bible better than a lot of other typical Christians, and I give them a lot of credit for that. And they do an amazing job. But when I ask the question with like when a person doesn't know, because a lot of individuals unfortunately do not know, even though they have internet, they have the capability of going out to be able to be interacting, but the fear of rejection has actually stifled their interactions and connection, and to be able to ask for help but not knowing how to even receive help becomes difficult. And the reason I was asking about the religion perspective of it is because my understanding with especially within certain Christian sects, there's a lot of community there. And it's a lot of role modeling and a lot of healing and a lot of buy-in. So that's why I was asking, and I was inviting that type of conversation into this.
Yeah, well, there we could go a lot of different directions with that. What do you feel like specifically would be most important to discuss or for your listeners to learn about?
So about how believing in God, some people this might actually help out. And how does forgiveness look like? How does repentance look like? I
Mm,
know this is going away from the hypnotherapy, but I believe this is along the lines of your core values.
yeah,
Eh,
yeah,
go
100%. I 100% agree with you that those are what uh, we should address and talk about. And it doesn't. I don't think it's any different than what hypnotherapy or the objective of any therapy is. That really we're just trying to repent, which if you look at that word metanoia in the Greek, repentance just means to learn something new. It means gaining knowledge. So you can think of John the Baptist standing on the banks of the River Jordan saying, change your mind. He's saying repent. That's the word that we have in the Greek Bible. But he's really saying, change your mind, open your mind, change your mind, learn something new, right? That's all he's saying. Be open, be as a little child, learn something. And that's all I believe repentance is. And when it comes to like progressing in the gospel and trying to be perfect, I think it's really easy to get stuck in all these guilt complex and perfectionist complexes that just cripple the heck out of you because you're never satisfied with your best. Your best is never good enough. And so people, um, I see this so often, Will. I see it so often in people who come in with a pornography problem and they grew up in the church and they're told, hey, you're horrible because you had this problem. It's like, no, you're not horrible. 99% of people on the planet are going to struggle with something like this, if not a lust problem, something very similar. Everyone is going to struggle with this. This is just the nature and condition of humanity. And God created us this way, and He created us in His image. And we're still having this kind of an experience. But perfection, when Christ says, hey, be ye perfect even as I am, or even as your Father in heaven is perfect, I don't anymore see that as flawlessness. I see perfection as just how he described it, that you need to be repentant and grace makes up the rest. Like, shoot, man, if we didn't have grace, we'd all be hosed. According to the Christian tradition, it's a really good thing that Christ died on the cross, suffered for us, so he could offer grace to the people who are repentant, who are just saying, hey, I'm not good enough, or I'm not enough. Can you make up the difference? I have a lot of people who come in and they want help with self-confidence, self-esteem. They say, hey, I'm not enough. Well, they end up coming to the conclusion, well, yeah, I'm not enough. And that's why Christ died for me. And these people who have a gospel foundation, that's kind of where they go with it. And they end up being okay. And the belief in God, if you listen to any of Andrew Huberman's stuff, he's been talking more and more about his relationship with God, or how important it is for people who are studying just the neuroscience to understand, hey, this God belief is really important. Because the people who are in the deepest dumps and gutters of life that believe in God and they give it up and they say, you know what, I believe everything's going to be okay. Why? Oh, because God said it would be, because there's a heaven, because I can be saved from this. It gives them a hope that without it, a lot of people, they'll just continue to flounder for a long time.
Totally agree with that. And I totally agree. If we don't actually have faith, or if we don't believe in using the word repent, then we can't have that change where we can't acknowledge that we have a pornography or a food or whatever other type of addiction, whatever type of thinking error that got us to that point. And I definitely agree with how we are tested. We all tested differently, but when we're able to be open and vulnerable, and it sounds like when that bishop was vulnerable with you about being able to say, hey, I have a pornography problem, and you were able to sit with that person to help them change their mindset instead of actually judging them outwardly and being able to connect with them, it allowed them to be able to rethink that issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've come more and more to kind of believe that every problem that somebody has, they you mentioned maybe they didn't have the role model. I agree. That is what they didn't have. They didn't have the role model, or they didn't have the knowledge. And therefore, if they didn't have the knowledge, that's why Christ tells us, treat others as you'd want them to treat you. We got this whole golden rule thing. And he says, don't condemn others and don't judge them unrighteously. You have no idea where they're coming from. And to say they shouldn't be doing that, or, they shouldn't be making that mistake. If they only are making that mistake because they don't have the knowledge base yet to not make it, then it's not their fault. Like, there's nothing wrong that's happening here. That would be like telling a child you shouldn't be falling over when you're trying to walk. Like, why are you falling over? Stop that. I'm going to judge you for that. You would never do that. And yet we do it all to each other. And I think that that's totally unnecessary. You can remove all that judgment and say, well, you have a problem, I have a problem, we all have problems, and we all just don't know enough to fix our problems. So let's dive into it and figure it out.
It makes sense. And I appreciate you being able to explain it in very layman's terms. It sounds like when you are sitting with a person and actually hearing what's going on, you're allowing them to be able to really pull the problem out. And you mentioned before about how traditional talk therapy, where they'll use CBT, DBT, Like cognitive behavioral therapy, thought shapes behavior, behavior shapes emotions, emotion shapes thoughts in the same way, vice versa. And what you're talking about is actually getting to the seed of the problem that's actually creating this thinking error, that is actually creating this emotion error, that's creating this behavior error, and it's actually breaking it up. So I do appreciate you being able to explain it in very layman's terms.
You're welcome. I don't know that I know how to explain it in any other terms unless we get into like the quantum science of it, which is really fantastical, but magical and fun to talk about too.
So when you're doing hypnotherapy, are you able to do it virtually or is it only in person?
Yeah, we've got a whole team. We've got a clinic where we can service a whole bunch of people wherever they are on Zoom, just like I'm talking to you. It doesn't require you to be in person. Um, because it's really just an internal state of focus where we give you prompts to help you relax. And there is an aspect of letting go that needs to be there. And if someone's in their own home, that can be easier. Um, but there is they need to the requisite for having any kind of therapy is that you need to know that you have a problem. You need to accept that you're getting help for that problem and hope that we can help you with it, right? As long as you do that, you're going to comply and you're going to follow along, play along, follow instructions, and you'll go right where you need to go. Because all hypnosis is just a fixation of thought on one thing so that different parts of the brain can all come into alignment. That's what flow state is. It's not even necessarily intensity of focus, because when all the compartments of the brain come online, it actually feels less effort. Like if you think of one part of the brain that you're making super intense and it's just chugging along, and then you say, no, I'm going to spread that over 10 parts of the brain, they're going to all do about half the effort. You're actually getting more effort out of the synergy than you would out of that one. And so it feels like there's less effort, even though you're actually concentrating for 1, 2, maybe 3 hours in a session, in like these marathon sessions sometimes that we do, and somebody's focused the whole time and they're sitting there and their legs don't fall asleep and they don't have to adjust and they feel completely in the zone. I mean, that's what a trance state is. Like in the Bible, Paul went into a trance state. Peter goes into a trance state, and that trance state in the Greek is the same word we use for ecstasy, but it just means that you're creating this singleness of thought that you get lost in. And that's a great place to be if you're doing it in a positive. If you're doing it in a negative, now you're just zoning out. You're not living life. You don't have purpose, and you're off in your imagination all the time. But focused on one thing that's solution oriented, it becomes very, very powerful. And how many times do people, if they have a problem, actually sit down and think about it for 5 minutes? I mean, like really think it through, not think about it, think it through. Very few people are able to do that, have either the ability to do that or know that that would bring them some kind of a benefit, which is why meditation is so powerful.
Yes, I've definitely seen the strengths of meditation. Same thing with prayer. If you pray first thing in the morning, or if you meditate the first thing in the morning, or if you pray before you go to sleep, or you meditate before you go to sleep, or journal, you're able to really hear all the other racing thoughts that are trying to win. And when you're starting to pay attention to, say, a certain cadence inside your mind, you have an intrusive thought that will come in that's trying to disrupt it, but not trying to hold on to it, but allowing it just to flow by and not trying to grasp it, just watching it, and then getting back to what the original thought is. It's been extremely beneficial for quite a when I was working with veterans, help them out when I'm right now as a social worker, helping out people when they are meditating or they're journaling. They're allowing themselves to actually witness what is actually going on internally. But and I agree with what you're saying with the way that flow state is. Like flow, when you're in that state, you're in the zone. You're able to just be with it. It's not actually having all this other resistance from the intrusive thoughts to I am hungry or I'm tired. You're just moving and it all makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing state to get. And so if you can do therapy with somebody while in that state, you can speed up the process. I mean, you can speed it up like crazy. People will come out of the session, they'll have no idea how much time has actually elapsed. And I was actually trained that you can only address one emotional problem in each session. If you're like an onion, you peel these layers back, one emotion here until we get to the core of the problem that might take several sessions. And since then, I've learned otherwise, that you can hit every single layer all the way down to the core of the problem and blow it out in one session. And if you know how to do that, you can facilitate change. It's literally at the speed of thought. And when they're all done, they can tell you, hey, I'm done with the problem, even though they've never gone back out into the world and been faced with that temptation or problem again. They already know in advance that it's fixed because their mind has so thoroughly latched on to that better program and that new way of thinking. And then we do a testing protocol to test the resilience of the new program in their subconscious mind. And that's really cool to see that you can do it very, very quickly.
So where can people find you?
Well, I got a website, nolimitshypnotherapy.com. We can see people in person down here in Utah County. We can also see them on Zoom in other parts of the world. That's for our hypnotherapy services. I also have a Get Certified tab on that website where people can go if they want to get certified. A lot of coaches, counselors, therapists, they'll add this to their repertoire because, they want a modality that is maybe different or that works faster. We have a crew of people that either work with us or want to work with us that are former therapists that get certified in this. And they're like, oh man, this is what I've been praying for years, to find a modality that works very quickly. And it's cool because it's not, I don't have like an intuitive bone in my body, Will. Like, I don't feel like I could ever do like energy work or anything like that, which is why I like hypnotherapy, because it's a very kind of mechanical way of very repeatable, methodical way of creating the change and the transformation inside somebody. And so it's teachable, it's replicatable by really anyone who wants to learn it. So we have that. There's a school where we certify people into the National Guild of Hypnotists, which is the highest, largest certifying body in the world of hypnotists that are not licensed psychologists. So I'm a certified instructor with them.
Well, my buddy Brandon just said it all starts with intentionality and people being willing and wanting, being open-minded to different ways of healing and allowing you and your team to do what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really do appreciate that. And I'm going to, when we get off, I'm going to put that right onto his Facebook Live and YouTube Live, because that's where it can be able to be put off of. And so people can be able to get in touch with you. Do you have any ending thoughts or closing thoughts?
Yeah. I would probably share it. Is it okay if I just take like a minute or two to share what I feel like is the most important thing I've learned when doing this work?
You could take several if you want.
You kind of talked about shame. Shame is really any form of self-criticism, I think. And whenever you move into self-criticism, self-rejection, self-hatred, self-resentment, any of those, we know that physically in the body, you're depleting energy stores, as if your body's like a big battery, right? And you deplete the energy when you go into self-criticism. And that's what I see everyone's coming in with. They have some form of, they're not enough, right? That's the universal negative self-thought. And so moving from that, we find that the answer is always moving into self-acceptance, self-love, self-compassion, self-esteem, self-confidence. The movement from self-criticism to self-acceptance, people usually need to have a lot of reasons to do that. And that's because they're doing it from the conscious side of their mind. The conscious side of their mind is going to say, oh, well, I'm here and I want to be here. And it's going to take all these steps for me to get here. It'll take me a year or two of practice, But that's not how the subconscious mind works. The subconscious mind is literally functioning outside of time. You learn manifesting techniques. You're not inside time anymore. You're creating instantaneous changes now. You're bringing a 10-year goal into immediacy. And that's the same thing that's happening when we want to move from self-criticism to self-love, self-acceptance. It's my understanding that in one session with people, they can move from here to here just because they realize it's not working for them. It's not working for them to be in self-criticism of any kind. Self-acceptance is the only way forward. Self-love is the only way forward. It's the only thing that's going to increase the energy stores enough for me to overcome my problem. And so when they have a problem that requires a certain energy level, let's say pornography, and they say, well, I'll love myself when I overcome my problem. Well, now you're in a paradox. Because they want to move to self-love, but they say they're not going to do it and accept themselves until they overcome their problem. But they'll never have the energy to overcome their problem until they move into self-love in advance of solving the problem. Does that make sense?
It does, because you're being the change that you want to see, or you're being the bait to the fish you want to catch, instead of trying to catch the fish and then actually distribute the bait for it. Or it does make sense, because if you don't actually allow yourself to just be okay with where you're at, also being that person intentionally. I had a buddy that actually just wrote something. This guy's name is Brandon. Brandon, I served with about 20 years ago, my first tour in Iraq with him. And he was another calm guy as well. And when I saw him, and then honestly, our conversations, Christian now, he was heavily practicing, sober, really inspirational dude. And instead of actually just saying, like, hey, I want to be sober, he's choosing to be sober. Instead of, I want to be a Christian only when things are right, he's being a Christian and he's making the things right. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and having the energy stores sufficient to overcome your problem now gives you the energy stores to help other people solve their problems too, which you can't do if you don't have enough energy to solve your own problem. You can't do it for other people. So that's why I appreciate what you're doing, podcasting and helping people out.
The reason I started up this podcast is enough of my friends that completed suicide, or that the new nomenclature is die by suicide. The fact of the male loneliness epidemic is quite huge, and I look at whatever modality it takes to be able to reach somebody. It's maybe I learned something along the way. Maybe it's psychedelics. Maybe it's God. Maybe it's hypnotherapy. Maybe it's just playing basketball, meeting up with some friends. But at the end of the day, it's if we're not able to reach them where they are, in a metaphor of being in their basement, we're not going to be able to reach them at all. And if we're not able to use the same language that makes sense and resonates with a person and helping remove that shame barrier out of the way, then we're not going to be able to show them that they can change. And being vulnerable, I'm a 6'2", 270-pound man. It's if I can actually show it, I can help role model it for other people. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't able to role model it for me. Love my dad, God bless his soul. But we can only do what we can do. And if I can help people change, then I'm doing a good job. But like I said, I lost too many buddies to this. And if hypnotherapy helps them out, outstanding. If psychedelics does it, cool. If hearing about the word of God, outstanding. I just want people to be healed.
Yeah. 100% agree with everything you just said. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Nelson.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate being on with you. And for any of your listeners, I'm happy to send you over those links there's a free half-hour training on how to redirect your subconscious mind out of negative emotions. That's one I can send you. And then I can send you a free copy of my ebook to send out to whoever thinks it might be helpful for them.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll add that to this link. Thank you, Nelson.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.